Imagine an engine so powerful that it could dominate any racetrack. And yet, almost no one outside Dodge's inner circle truly understood it. This was the legendary 426 HEMI, a mechanical beast destined to change the muscle car era forever. Nicknamed the elephant engine, its hemispherical combustion chambers allowed air and fuel to flow more efficiently than anything else on the market. The result? Raw, untamed horsepower that left competitors shaking. Dodge had created a secret weapon, a monster designed to conquer both the streets and the track. What made this engine so extraordinary wasn't just its power, it was the controversy surrounding it. NASCAR officials initially refused to allow it to compete, arguing it gave Dodge an unfair advantage. Rival manufacturers lobbied to see it banned. Can you imagine an engine so dominant that it was nearly illegal before it even hit the streets? For Dodge, this wasn't just about racing. It was about proving themselves against Ford, Chevrolet, and Pontiac in the high-stakes battle of muscle cars. Yet, the HEMI's brilliance was hidden in secrecy. Only a handful of engineers and drivers knew the full potential and the danger of what they had built. And here's the twist. Dodge deliberately restrained some of the engine's capabilities. They knew the 426 HEMI could be too much for the streets, too powerful for the track. But they also knew it could create legends. For those who experienced it, the engine wasn't just metal and pistons, it was a statement, a declaration of power and ambition. But the story doesn't end here. Behind the thunderous roar and blistering quarter-mile times lies a darker secret. Why did NASCAR push back so hard against this engine? What rivalries, fears, and corporate politics were at play? The first time the 426 HEMI hit the racetrack, the world of racing changed forever. Its roar was more than noise, it was a warning. Quarter-mile times dropped, competitors were stunned, and Dodge suddenly became the king of horsepower. But with this dominance came controversy. NASCAR officials were alarmed. The HEMI wasn't just fast, it was revolutionary. Its hemispherical combustion chambers produced levels of power that seemed almost unfair. Drivers who had mastered other engines struggled to keep up, and whispers spread among rival teams. This engine could change the very rules of racing. Rival manufacturers didn't stay quiet. Ford and Chevrolet lobbied NASCAR, arguing that Dodge had built an engine that gave them an unstoppable advantage. The tension was palpable. Dodge engineers had created a monster one so powerful, it forced the sport to rethink fairness and safety. Yet Dodge wasn't backing down. Every race became a battlefield of innovation and audacity. Engineers and drivers pushed the 426 HEMI to its limits, defying expectations and regulations alike. The engine wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of defiance, of taking risks. Others were too afraid to attempt. Fans watched in awe as the elephant engine decimated the competition. Street racers and spectators alike felt the thrill. The HEMI wasn't merely dominating, it was rewriting the muscle car narrative. Every roar of its exhaust reminded the world that Dodge had arrived, and they weren't playing by anyone else's rules. But there was more than just speed at stake. Behind the scenes, rivalries fueled corporate maneuvering, sabotage rumors, and high-stakes politics. Dodge had unleashed an engine that was as much about strategy and rebellion about raw power. They called it the elephant engine, and for good reason. The Dodge 426 HEMI wasn't just another V8. It was a beast born out of pure necessity, forged on the racetracks and unleashed on the streets at a time when Detroit was in an all-out horsepower war. The HEMI wasn't subtle, it wasn't polite, it was raw, it was menacing, and it changed the muscle car game forever. But let's rewind. Back to the early 1960s, NASCAR was exploding in popularity. Stock car racing wasn't just a sport, it was marketing. It was brand loyalty. It was a way for automakers to prove who built the fastest, meanest machines in America. And Dodge was tired of playing catch-up. Chevrolet had their big blocks. Ford was coming in hot with their 427s. Plymouth was in the mix. But Chrysler, the parent of Dodge, needed something that would not only win races, but completely dominate them. The solution? A brand new engine, one that engineers designed not for comfort, not for fuel economy, not even for mass production, but for one thing and one thing only: winning. And so, the 426 cubic inch HEMI was born. Now, what made it so special? It was the hemispherical combustion chamber design, hence the nickname HEMI. Instead of the usual wedge-shaped chambers found in most V8s, this design allowed for larger valves, straighter airflow, and far more efficient combustion. Translation? The engine could breathe better, burn fuel better, and produce an absolutely monstrous amount of power. But here's the thing. The HEMI wasn't some lightweight, high-revving small block. This was a brute. Its block was massive, its heads were oversized, and it was heavy. So heavy that mechanics nicknamed it the elephant. But when you put your foot down, when that throttle opened wide, the elephant roared with a ferocity no other engine of its time could match. In 1964, the HEMI made its NASCAR debut, and it didn't just compete, it obliterated. Richard Petty, driving a Plymouth powered by the 426 HEMI, absolutely dominated the Daytona 500. He didn't just win, he lapped the competition. Chrysler teams running HEMIs swept the race, making the engine an instant legend. NASCAR fans had never seen anything like it. Overnight, the HEMI became the engine everyone feared, and every rival manufacturer dreaded. But the dominance didn't last long. You see, NASCAR, worried that the HEMI gave Dodge and Plymouth too much of an advantage, decided to ban it in 1965 unless Chrysler built a street version for the public. And so, Dodge did exactly that. Enter the Street HEMI, released in 1966. On paper, Dodge claimed it made 425 horsepower, but anyone who knew cars back then knew the truth. That number was underrated. In reality, a well-tuned HEMI was pushing closer to 470, even 500 horsepower, straight from the factory. But here's where the story gets even more legendary, because the HEMI didn't just represent speed, it came to symbolize an entire era. The late 1960s and early 1970s were the golden age of muscle cars. The streets were filled with GTOs, Mustangs, Camaros, Roadrunners, but none of them had the same aura as a HEMI. Dodge even ran ads that said, "Suddenly it's 1970, that thing got a HEMI," and those ads weren't exaggerating. Having a HEMI under your hood was like having a king's crown. It was bragging rights. It was respect. It was fear. And yet, as with all legends, the reign of the HEMI didn't last forever. By the early 1970s, new government regulations were coming down hard. Emission standards were tightening. Insurance premiums for high horsepower cars skyrocketed. And then came the fuel crisis. Suddenly, buyers weren't looking for raw power. They wanted efficiency. And the mighty 426 HEMI, it was a dinosaur in this new world. Too big, too thirsty, too brutal for the changing times. By 1971, the elephant was gone. Dodge discontinued the 426 HEMI, and just like that, one of the most legendary engines in American history became a memory. But it was never forgotten. Because here's the truth. The HEMI didn't just disappear, it became myth. Collectors began hunting down original HEMI cars, paying huge sums for them. At auctions today, a genuine HEMI Cuda or Charger can fetch prices in the hundreds of thousands, even millions. Why? Because people know. They know that the 426 HEMI wasn't just another engine. It was a piece of muscle car history, a symbol of a time when engineers weren't afraid to push limits, when rules were bent or broken, and when cars were built for pure, unfiltered performance. And Dodge never forgot either. Decades later, the HEMI name was revived. Modern Challengers and Chargers once again carried HEMI engines, though not quite the same as the original elephant, they carried its spirit. And when Dodge introduced the Hellcat, and then the Demon, suddenly the ghost of the 426 HEMI was alive again. It was proof that even in the modern era, people still craved that insane, uncontrollable, unapologetic power. So, how did the Dodge 426 HEMI change the muscle car era forever? By showing the world that sometimes excess is the point, that an engine doesn't have to be practical to be unforgettable, that sheer dominance on the track can translate into legend on the street. The 426 HEMI was feared, it was banned, it was worshipped, and today, More than 50 years later, it's still the benchmark by which all muscle car engines are judged. Because, in the end, the Dodge HEMI wasn't just an engine. It was the muscle car era, distilled into iron, gasoline, and thunder. And that, my friends, is why the 426 HEMI will never be forgotten.